Hi, it's Deborah Hamilton again. Thank you for listening to Why Do Pets Matter? Remember to like and share so we can get out there in a bigger way. Today, I have my dear friend, Fiona Farrell, here with us, and she is a fellow attorney. She and I belong to the New York State Bar and American Bar Association Animal Law Committees. We are both avid horsewomen. She still has horses. I don't. And she has time to read some fiction, which I am very jealous about. Hi, I'm Deborah Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. So Fiona, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor, and I think it's going to be fun.
Oh, it's going to be great fun. Everybody who gets on the podcast after we get off, they go, wow, that was easy. I want to like hit that little button from Staples. That was easy. That was easy. Because it really is just, why do pets matter to you? That's the only question I ask. And let me know what your thoughts are. Why do pets matter to you?
I'm just hearing this question for the first time now.
That's good. I usually don't give much lead up time because I don't want you to dwell on it. I want you to say what's the first thing that comes to your head.
And when I've been thinking about the dogs in my life lately because I wrote up a little vignette about a memory I had of one of my dogs. And I've been thinking how thoroughly immersed my family has been with its dogs. Pets have been so integrated into my life that it's so hard for me to be able to tell you why they matter. They're just like they're cellular.
They're part of the family. They're more than companions. They're family members.
I don't think of them as family.
Oh,
I'm
good. Tell me more.
I believe that animals, they are their own species. And yes, they share the house with me, or they share the field behind the house with me. It's almost an insult. It's denying their animalhood,
Agency.
their
Their
personhood.
agency. Right.
Yeah, their agency, their identity. They're a separate species from us. I mean, it's hard enough being married to a man. I call it a mixed marriage. So to bring in another species as family is a little bit presumptuous. I mean, do they think of us as family?
Well, we don't know because they really can't tell us. I think that's a great question. Oh, I love that question. Do they think of us as family? Oh, I'm writing something about that.
Yeah.
And maybe we can write it together because I think that's a great, I mean, why do pets matter? And why do we matter to pets, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Such a great way to start off this podcast because no one has ever really answered that question that way. You are a phenom, my friend, and I knew you would be, especially, early in the morning and we're doing this. It's such a great question because I never feel as if, and I never really articulated this, I never felt as if my pets didn't have their own agency. I knew they were their own people. And I actually, tell me how you think, I actually revel in their independence and their unique personalities.
Oh, absolutely. I had a horse who died just over a year ago, and he was born here on the farm, and he was a very quirky personality. We said that he had imprinted on one of our standard poodles, who we called a circus poodle. She would do a helicopter move rather than wag her tail. She would move her whole body around in circles, and he imprinted on her. And or what, this is totally unscientific saying that he imprinted, but he behaved a lot in very dog-like ways and very poodle-like ways. And he was disliked intensely by various veterinarians because he was not that compliant. But he just had so much character. And I really think of him as having had agency.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting you're saying that, because I had 3 horses and each of them had totally different personalities, like all of your horses have totally different personalities. I was speaking to someone the other day about therapy horses, and I'm very involved, as you probably know, with the National Dog Show Therapy Dog Symposium, and we had Aubrey Fine on, Dr. Aubrey Fine, who does a lot of animal therapy, where he brings animals into his therapy sessions with humans, and he said he always maintains just what you said. That the animal has its own agency. If the animal wants to be with you, great. If it doesn't want to be with you, that's okay too. So tell me a little bit more about your years with your animals and how they have really guided you, because being in animal law and being in equine animal law is so different, because they are not the first animal you think of when you think of law.
Or pets.
Or pets, yes, but they are the best pets, and people who have not had one yet, I don't want to say this out loud, but you don't know what you're missing. They keep you safe, right? So tell us.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about dogs and horses, because the first pet that meant so much to me predated me. My parents were married in the day after Christmas, and that April they got their first dog, and he was going to be a black miniature poodle, but he grew to be what's known as a Moyenne, which is technically a standard poodle. He was a short standard poodle, and his name was Trio, because with him they made 3. And so they were obviously very integrated, and they had both grown up with dogs in their house. An Irish Terrier, I remember, on my father's side, which was sort of very popular in the 20s. And my mother had a Boston Terrier.
Oh, terriers. Those are much different than poodles.
Yes. And I know, and they got this poodle in 1952. So I was born 6 years later. And though I'm 29.
I know, so am I. I was born the same year, and I'm 29 too.
Right. Yeah. It's the math.
Funny how that works.
Anyway, my parents were both very concerned. How was Trio going to interact with a baby? What was it going to be like having, a baby and Trio? And would that be an issue for Trio?
Yeah.
And would he be a danger to the baby? But obviously, not obviously, but what they told me was that we bonded right away. And I remember he lived until I was 9. So he lived to be 15. And we have some wonderful pictures of him, which I can share if you want with you to share with your audience.
Oh, I'd love that.
And I remember he had a yellow leather collar that was very, very smart, and a yellow lead. But most of the time he just had sort of, whatever catch can. And he was sort of a scruffy poodle. He wasn't beautifully groomed. None of our dogs have been groomed to show standard. I'm losing track of what you asked me. What was the other question? It was about horses?
Yes, how they've impacted your life, how they impacted, why they mattered to some of the choices you made, like they did.
Well, where I live. I mean, they've influenced me in huge ways. We live where we live because we wanted to have horses at home, and to have horses. And when my husband met me and married me, I had one elderly dog who was living with my parents, Romy, and whose full name was Romane Saint Vivant East Albany, because from an old friend of mine in law school, he thought that all dogs should have as their last name where they were born. So again, sort of their autonomy, not so he wasn't or she wasn't Romy Farrell. So Romy was living with my parents. So he met Romy there, but really I was not living with any animals. There were no horses, no dogs. And within 5 years, we had a pregnant mare. We had, on our first anniversary, where 2 poodles were born. And we got the first of them in January. We went through the 1997 ice storm. We drove through northern New York to Ontario to pick her up. And her name was her name was Page One.
Oh, I love that name.
And she was called, my husband called her Page One because she was born on our paper wedding, or it was the paper anniversary.
Right.
And she was the first. So she was Page One, or sometimes P1.
Yeah.
And we love Page One so much. And she was the circus poodle. In May of that year, we went up and got one of her litter mates, Marigold. And Marigold was a much more serious poodle. This is all just going to end up being like thumbnail portraits of the animals.
And that's what it's supposed to be. Why do pets matter? I mean, look at how this is making you smile first thing in the morning.
It is. It's just wonderful going back over them and remembering them, because our most recent dog died 3 weeks ago, and we only have one cat in the house right now. In fact, my husband said earlier this morning, and you can tell pets are pretty integrated into his life now. We used to have 24 legs in the house, and now we only have 4.
Yeah, really hard. And it is deafening silence.
It is. And it's deafening gestures. It's like when I get out of the car, I used to go first thing to the door, the garage adjoins the house, go first thing to the door into the house, leave the garage door up, and call for the dogs, or once our last dog was deaf, go and find her so she could come out for a little walk before I came in. Or having to wrestle groceries in through the door and making sure the dog didn't get loose, or 3 dogs at a time didn't get loose, or 3 dogs and 3 cats at a time didn't get loose. So there's that. But to go back to my husband, when he met me, no animals. And now he's like thoroughly animalized. I mean, I'm watching out the window right now, and he is mending a fence board that one of the horses, in their boredom and displeasure over the hay, decided he was going to entertain himself by breaking a fence board and then swinging it back and forth, kind of like a flap. And it was like, oh, this is all fun and games.
Yeah.
Fun and games until someone gets a splinter or worse. So rushed out to fix that. And he's retired now, and he is totally immersed in the horses.
Well, I'm going to add this only as an antidote. So when I met my husband, I had one dog who lived with my parents, an Irish setter that my sister had gotten from her college roommate. But the dog really bonded with me because she was in college. I was home. The dog had come home. Okay. And I've never lived without an Irish setter since. We had German Schnauzer since the beginning. But when we got married, my husband would always say to people, because I got a dog after I graduated from law school, I got a dog, Raisin, and my kennel name is Rum Raisin. So that every dog that ever became a champion would reiterate that Raisin was always my first champion. Although she never became a champion because she was not of champion stock or of good breeding.
Yeah.
So we got Raisin, and then, went to a dog show, and like your husband, my husband said he didn't read the fine print in the marriage contract that said, I will have as many dogs as I possibly can. At one point, I think we had 24 if you counted the puppies and everything else. So wow. He has been a saint. And he was once paying the farrier bill because I wasn't working. I was home with the kids. And he said, "How many legs does your horse have?" And I said, 12. He goes, "How does a horse have 12 legs?" I said, "Because he needs special shoes." Because I was really only telling him I had one horse when I had three. So I had that, and he was so patient. But I loved your story. Oh my God, first thing this morning, because it reminds me of my husband, who was really not doggy. And the thing that's really interesting, he worked so hard and he loved my dogs. And then about 18 months, 20 months ago, he said to me, I've never owned a dog. And he's right. We've had millions of dogs through this house, and they tolerate him. And if I'm not home, they do look to him for sustenance, not much else. So I bought him a little English Cocker Spaniel from a colleague of mine, lovely bitch, and we finished her. And that dog, I didn't do a thing for that dog. I said to him, "If you want this to be your dog," I said, "you need to do everything for her." And he has bonded with this dog and this dog. I don't know how
And what's
you're
the dog's name?
Stella. He named
Oh,
it too, Stella. And it's really interesting because this dog knows that I'm the boss and I do all the mean things like cut their nails and get their knots out and bathe them and stuff. But he will bathe them and he'll hold them while I do it. But he loves her, she loves him, and she stays with him. You know how some pets have really old souls? Have you
yes.
had poodles
Yeah.
that have old souls? She's
Oh,
an
yes.
old soul. She will sit with him in his office all day long. She'll be 2 in May. She's a
Oh,
baby.
yeah,
But
yeah.
she's
So
the
she's like, you would
truest.
expect energy and running around.
Nothing. She
Yeah.
is his. She understands her mission in life. She has complete agency because if she told him to jump up and down 3 times, he would. Uh, but your husband and my husband sound so alike because they both got into this relationship with these women who were in law school or, finished law school or whatever and thought, well, this is going to be our life. And then all of a sudden, you know, as my husband said, our house was built on top of the kennel, and the kennel was the only part I was involved. And when we were here, when we moved to North Carolina, that was all about how could we keep the dogs safe and everything else. So you're right. I think of my dogs as independent rangers, and I never really articulated it the way you did so beautifully. So to continue it, I just love this story because it's so important for us to take a minute and recognize how important and impactful pets are to us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're down to one cat in the house, but they still, whether we had 6 animals in the house or whether we had 5 horses, 7 was for a brief time was the most we've had. We're down to 2 now. Well, and then one who lives away. She's at boarding school.
She's learning how to be a good baby horse.
She's learning how to be a good baby horse. They set the rhythm of your days. It's like feeding them in the morning, letting them out, letting them in. Sometimes it's done with curses. Other times it's like, oh, thank goodness this got me out walking and got me out in the fresh air, and I wouldn't be otherwise. And right now I am not as much out in the fresh air as I should be because I'm not walking a dog. And we're lucky to live next to a national park and with miles of walking trails. So, our regular walks with the dogs, the short walk was 2.4 miles.
Yeah.
And we do longer walks, and my husband would go out running with them. So, and figuring out what to eat. And we had one dog who had various health issues. So we went from, feeding kibble to feeding ground beef, to feeding chicken, to fish, to, not a raw diet. Actually, we cook our meat. But it's a pure meat, well, with various added things to make it complete, that we feed them. And so does the cat. The cat gets shredded chicken plus.
Yeah, I mean, the
Also
way we
feeding them, it is. So in this ways that people call their animals, which I don't, fur babies or members of the family, you're doing the same thing as one would with a member of the family, making sure they get their exercise, making sure they get their nutrition, making sure they get to the doctor, or not, you know?
It's such a great way to look at this because my animals are independent of me. And I know since you've had dogs and horses, there's a whole different relationship between people and their horses. And they've really started now to recognize that horses are pretty much in tune with people, and they've been using them as therapy animals for people with PTSD and things because the horses tend to, and I know I found this with my horse, I'm sure you found that with your horses, intuitive.
Yeah. And there's a certain, I don't necessarily buy into it entirely. And I haven't seen whether the study actually, there are studies that actually support it, but it's often said that horses' heartbeats and human heartbeats will co-regulate, and that the horse's heart is so big, so
Yeah.
it makes such a huge impact on being around a horse with the humans. And certainly if I'm nervous or uptight, so is the horse. And I
Yeah.
think that's something it's for, I see the role that they play in therapy is they can be there to be empathetic and to soothe and to bring down the breathing and do diaphragmatic breathing as opposed to chest breathing, and to all these good things. Yet at the same time, they call upon the person to self-regulate their emotions. Because say this is, for instance, there are programs with retired thoroughbreds at some of the prisons. They started in Wallkill in New York,
Yeah.
through the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. And prisoners look after the horses as part of their part of their program, their individualized
Their restorative natures. Yep.
Yeah. And also sometimes to be gaining job skills they can use on the outside. And when you're like, I could see there, like, say you do a weekend wounded warrior project with horses, that I think can be soothing and healing for the person. But in terms of personal growth, when you're exposed to a horse in a prison setting and you're caring for that horse and you're looking after that horse, it becomes a very deep experience. And in terms of, if you want to talk about life changing, I think there are many stories of how, because now there are programs, at least I know at Blackburn, outside of Lexington in Kentucky. There's one or two in Florida, one in Virginia, and some in women's prisons as well as men's prisons. So
it is such a wonderful opportunity for them, the horses, to provide some, I guess, grounding for the prisoners.
yeah,
Way they probably have never been grounded before. Maybe they were,
exactly.
but these, I think it's just so important to understand what these wonderful, gentle giants who can really kill you in an instant by accident or on purpose.
As a racetrack former outrider, lead pony person used to say to me, horses have two things on their mind: suicide and homicide. But rather than, which is a fun little thing to say. I don't know if it's necessarily true, but it's, to me, one of the things about horses is they are walking paradoxes. They're walking koans, if you're thinking in Buddhist terms. They're just they're incredibly fragile. They're incredibly lethal. They're big and strong. They have digestive systems that are totally messed up. They could kill them with colic in an instant, which is what happened to my 21-year-old. He died within an hour.
My halflinger.
Yep. There you go. Yeah. And it's, so you're always sort of, I think
they're so fragile, and yet they seem so stoic and strong and everything, and yet this little thing like a bellyache.
Yeah. Or
Exactly.
I'm looking out the window and my husband is giving one of the horses a treat. And here's this, 12, 1,300 pound animal, tall animal. He's 16'1", and he's gently bowing his head down and his whiskers are just touching my husband's palm and he's taking the treat.
Yep. It
And
makes you, I think watching it, I once took care of a horse and I'd pick his feet and I'd brush him and he'd shine. He was um a blood bay. He was beautiful.
oh, lovely.
He was beautiful, and he was owned by a friend of my mom's. And the guy goes, "Don't you want to ride him?" And I said, "Yeah, no." I said, "This is
Yeah.
this." I said, first of all, his name was Clube, and he'd kill you as soon as you get up on his back because he really didn't like to be rid, and probably had something wrong with his back, but it was way before chiropractics. And
Yeah.
I said, I just like to take care of him, and I'm sure you feel that way. It is my knitting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and that's interesting because I have lost my knitting mojo lately because I've had this young mare, and there was a period before that for 5 years where I was looking after, we had 2 or 3 horses here at home during that time, but I wasn't riding for 5 years because all the horses had sort of aged out and I just wasn't. And I was knitting. So you're absolutely perfect analogy.
Yeah, I love it because it's so important. I mean, this half hour goes so fast. I can't even believe it. I'd love to have you back because I think these kind of conversations, especially between two attorneys who probably might be seen by some of my listeners as, oh, well, they're animal law attorneys and this and that. Yet we really bond with these animals. So before we end, please let people know where they might be able to find you and what you do that helps them live better lives with their pets.
Well, I don't have a web presence, but you can Google me, Fiona Farrell, and
And you're on LinkedIn.
I am on LinkedIn, yes, and I am on Facebook and Instagram, um, as Fiona AF. Um, and uh, let's see, and I have an email if you would like me to give.
That would be great. We could
Okay.
put it in the notes too, so they can get it.
It's well, I'll give you the easy one. Fiona Farrell ESQ@gmail.com.
Perfect. Perfect.
So
Yeah,
that's
because this way everybody can get and what is it in the law that you do? I know we work together and you're brilliant and you put on so many wonderful programs in the New York State Bar Association and the ABA. But what tickles your fancy? What do you love to help people with?
I, there's 2 things that keep me drawn to the law. And one of them is I came from being a regulatory attorney and I went to being solo practice because we were deregulating, and I'm still a staunch regulator. And I think we're seeing some of the things that we have reaped from deregulating. So I went from regulating utility companies to saying, what am I going to do? So I decided, well, I've always loved horses. I'll set up an equine law practice. And I set out to learn as much as I could. And I had never focused on sales or contracts or any of that stuff in law school. I was a constitutional law wonk. And what I found, but I'd always sort of gone into the law of I want to change the world. I want to make it better. And I really had wanted to fight monopolies, but that wasn't an effective use of the law. Lena Khan was wonderful when she was here. But anyway, it was when the light bulb went off of, wow, private practice is really wonderful. And so is this solo small practice. I mean, it's so boutique. It's like a dressing room in the boutique, that I'm solving problems for people. I am improving the world one person at a time, one horse at a time. And sometimes it's a drastic thing, like doing some pro bono work for a rescue and making sure that a horse is being rescued and looked after, or being, solving a large problem like that. Sometimes it's as small as realizing when one drafts contracts to not refer to horses as it, but as to give them either mare, stallion, gelding, or it's still somewhat binary. in how it's defined, but it's a step away from calling them it.
Yeah.
So giving them some personhood, and also, making sure, for instance, when I used to do, say, racehorse syndications, saying, I won't help you unless you make sure you have retirement programs and plans for your horses. And the part of the money you bring in from this syndicate is set aside for their care.
The long-term
So,
care. Oh, well, you and I have to
long-term.
get back together because that's like my bailiwick.
Oh, I did not know that. We definitely do, because that's
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because my thought is in April when everyone is celebrating the foaling barn, right? And all the babies, I go, and are you there at the end when they need your most care? Because you were so excited, and maybe they turned out to be secretariat, and maybe they turned out like your horse or my horse, which were lovely animals that normal people enjoyed. And were you aware of where they were, how they were being cared for, and how they transitioned? Because my thought is every animal should transition. I'm sure it's yours too, in a peaceful way.
Yes. And actually, I recently been asked to be a vice president, to run for vice president, which I accepted, of the New York State Horse Council, which is in the process of reviving its involvement with New York equine affair, not equine affair, but equine matters. And
let me know how I can join if I can live out
yeah,
of state, because I live out of
oh,
state. I am a
totally
member of the North Carolina Horse Council, but not
Yeah.
the New York State. I'd love to.
And one of our issues that we're going to be holding workshops and helping people with is end of life decisions and euthanasia, and also looking for grants and help so that
Well, you
people.
and I are right there. We are going to do this again. And
Yeah.
everyone who's listening, thank you so much. This has been such a heartwarming podcast for me. So Fiona, thank you so very much.
Well, I've been very happy. I love talking with you under any circumstances.
Thank you. So today we talked to Fiona Farrell. We have no pictures. It was an early morning podcast. And so we both decided we didn't look very good. But we wanted to bring this podcast to you. It is a heartfelt discussion between two attorneys who love animals, and how they have navigated their lives. Plus, there are probably going to be a second and third segment because so much is being done with horses that I think all of you on the Why Do Pet Matters podcast want to hear. Remember, like us and share us and subscribe so that we can be found by others like you who want to hear about why pets matter to everyone who's working in the animal world. Thank you so much. This is Deborah Hamilton, Hamilton Law and Mediation, and the Why Do Pets Matter podcast.